The viewpoints expressed on Night Fright are not necessarily those of the host, the staff, the sponsors, or the affiliate stations. Tonight's program may contain graphic themes or images. Viewer discretion is advised.
There is a time for question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for horror and conspiracy. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Showtime. Welcome to the show. Welcome to a great show tonight, folks. You know, we're going to be looking at the JFK assassination tonight. Now, few people have the ilk that our guest tonight has. Few people have impacted the research on the JFK assassination as much as our guest tonight. And our guest is none other than Joan Mellen. That's right, folks, right here. Get the coffee going, get the tea going, get a beverage of your choice going, sit in that comfy chair, kick back, relax. We're going to take you on a wonderful ride tonight. Joan's got a new book out called Faustian Bargains. Lyndon Johnson, Mac Wallace, and the robber baron culture in Texas. Perhaps no president has had a more ambiguous reputation than LBJ. He maneuvered colleagues and turned bills into law better than anyone. He was trailed by a legacy of underhanded dealings from his stolen Senate election in 1948, all the way to kickbacks from deals, folks, with Texas wheeler dealer, you'll know this name, Billie Estes, and defense contractors like Brown and Root. Now, on the verge of investigation, Johnson lucked out, if you will, and was reprieved when he became president. The second JFK was assassinated. Now, among the remaining mysteries about Johnson has been LBJ's relationship to Mac Wallace. Mac Wallace in 1951, folks, shot a Texas man, are you ready for this, who was having an affair with none other than Johnson's very own sister, Josepha. Now, Josepha at the time was also Mac Wallace's lover. When Mac Wallace was arrested, he very coolly stated, "I work for Johnson. I need to get back to Washington." Johnson's own lawyer, John Cofer, defended Wallace on that murder charge. Now get this, folks. Wallace ended up being convicted of murder. But are you ready for this? He received a suspended sentence. But wait, it doesn't gets better, folks. It doesn't end there. When Wallace was able to get a high security clearance from LBJ's friend and defense contractor D.H. Byrd, the Office of Naval Intelligence tried for 11 years to get it revoked, all without any success. Something going on there? That's what we're going to look at tonight. Using crucial Life magazine and naval intelligence files and the unredacted FBI files on Mac Wallace himself, never before utilized by others, investigative writer Joan Mellen skillfully connects these two disparate Texas lives and lends stark credence to the dark side of Lyndon Johnson that has largely gone unsubstantiated. Joan Mellen is a professor at Temple University and has authored an amazing 22 books. Joan, how do you do it? That's like a book a year, isn't it?
I wonder sometimes. I'm numb. I'm tired. I'm writing a book about the USS Liberty right now. But
okay.
In which Johnson played
a huge part in that.
Role. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have to deal with that too.
The book better than I could. I could just stop now. You really hit all the high points. Excellent, including all the nuances, the D.H. Byrd, the security clearance, the Office of Naval Intelligence files. It was very hard, even for the person whose files I used originally for Mac Wallace was a Dallas policeman named John Fraser Harrison, J. Harrison. And Harrison somehow collaborating with Barr McClellan, who wrote a book called Power, Money, and something, that they got the bee in their bonnet that it was Mac Wallace's fingerprint that was on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, the one unidentified print in the hands of the Warren Commission. And they decided so if we have Mac Wallace's print up there, and we can prove it, then we can connect Johnson to the planning of the Kennedy assassination, which seems to be in everybody's mind, and it certainly seems it's very hard to believe that he didn't have prior foreknowledge of the Kennedy assassination, and we can't prove that he certainly wasn't there, but it's certainly been a question. I'm sort of getting ahead of myself, maybe.
No, that's fine, but folks, just to give you some context, that fingerprint was allegedly found on one of the boxes that was used to prop up a type of sniper's nest in the 6th floor Texas School Book Depository.
Right. And of course, we should add, just for the background, that the School Book Depository that building was owned by D.H. Byrd, for whom Mac Wallace had been working. And then when Mac Wallace moved on to Ling Electronics, Ling had joined with Temco and Chance Volt. That's D.H. Byrd's company. So he was still connected to Byrd, even though he moved to California and was working for James Ling of Ling Electronics. So since I was writing about Mac Wallace, it seemed to be important not to rely on previous evidence of whether that fingerprint was Mac Wallace's. And so I redid the investigation that J. Harrison had done. Mm-hmm. And J. Harrison had in his hands the Austin, which was hard to get for him even then, the Austin police fingerprints that were taken when Mac Wallace was arrested for the murder of Kinzer. And they were very smeared because the people were very sloppy in Austin. They did not wipe off the roller when they did from the previous suspect when they did Mac Wallace's fingerprint. So it was not a clear fingerprint. I had an advantage. More time had elapsed, and the U.S. military records were now available, and I was able to get the Navy fingerprints. Because when Mac Wallace joined the U.S. Marines in 1939, the Navy took his prints, Marines and Navy being synonymous there. So I had good prints from St. Louis, the National Archives in St. Louis, which has military records. So I had two sets, Austin, I had the Navy, and then, of course, the unidentified print that's in the hands of the National Archives, and that was taken in a photograph by the FBI on the day of the Kennedy assassination, and they're pretty good. So those three, and I hired a forensic fingerprint examiner who was an officer of the organization that certified print examiners. I didn't know. I just got him off the internet, and it turned out that he had that credential, which figures in this. So he had been a police officer, and then he had studied at Quantico at the FBI facilities, and he wanted a pristine photograph of the original, the Warren Commission print, the unidentified print. But I got it. The National Archives provided a terrific print. That was because the FBI took a terrific print. Now we had the three. And so his name was Bob Garrett, and he went away with all this material, including J. Harrison's files and the findings of the previous examiners. And I have to say, maybe it was a little disappointing to me and to the publisher, Bloomsbury, to find out that they did not match.
They didn't.
The Navy and the Austin print matched. Mm-hmm. But they did not. None of them matched with the one in the National Archives Warren Commission papers. So he wasn't there. If that's your evidence that Mac Wallace was up there, he wasn't. Now what are we going to do? Well, if we're going to connect Johnson to foreknowledge of the Kennedy assassination, we're not going to do it on that fingerprint. Can't be done.
John, can I just interrupt you just for one quick second, and we'll finish up with the fingerprints? That unidentified fingerprint. Has it ever been linked to Lee Harvey Oswald?
Oh no, of course they
They
tested.
tried it, right? And
They tested every employee of the book depository.
it turned out negative in every case.
Everybody that could have been there, yes.
Okay, thank you, Joan. Sorry to interrupt you.
So now what? So that just added to it, I have to say. Now that doesn't mean Mac Wallace was a saint. It doesn't mean that he didn't know Johnson, because he did. It doesn't mean that Johnson was not behind the suspended sentence that you referred to, Brent. It doesn't mean that Johnson didn't secure the secret. He had a security clearance at the level of secret. It didn't mean that Johnson wasn't responsible for that. You cannot find a trace of that. And the organization that certifies people to work for defense contractors, called DISCO, was not in existence in 1952 at the time of the Wallace trial. I called them, so we can't trace back how he actually got it. And I couldn't, so you win some, you lose some. I could not get Johnson. Johnson was wily. Holland McCombs, who was the journalist for Life magazine, who did the big investigation of Johnson for Life that was going to be published but wasn't when President Kennedy was killed. He found, as he was a Texan, he had a ranch in Texas, and he went around and he talked to many, many people. Nobody allowed him to use their names. He couldn't, Johnson's name, he looked in all the financial records, real estate records, ownership of stocks. Johnson's name is nowhere. He could keep his name out of everything. He used these deputy sheriffs and various people that did his dirty work for him in Texas, and also Cliff Carter. He had a right-hand man on the ground in Texas who was a soda bottler in Bryan, Texas, and he had whatever, and he could never be. He always had intermediaries, except for one instance, and this was sort of out of context. But Johnson was obsessed with Billie Saul Estes. He was terrified that his name would come up in the scandals involving the scams and theft and all that stuff about Billie Saul Estes. And so there was Billie Saul Estes was scheduled to meet in the town. God, I can't remember the name.
It's okay.
Some town. And Johnson hires a deputy sheriff to hire a private investigator to spy on Billie Saul Estes and this Republican apparatchik from politics that he was going to be talking to Billie Saul Estes. And Johnson wanted to know what Billie Saul Estes was saying to this guy. So he hires this PI, only Billie Saul Estes doesn't show up. So the deputy sheriff writes a letter to Johnson saying, and a reporter called Mike Cox in Texas found this material. He said, "I'm really sorry, but I have to send you a bill, whatever, several $100s, even though Billie Saul Estes didn't show up." Well, that's on the record, and that Johnson couldn't destroy that, and we have that letter.
What is Billie Saul Estes' character, just for folks that are unaware?
Billie Saul Estes was a farmer, a very strange individual, but clever. He had scams. He had scams from the time he was 8 years old. He sold cattle. He sold things. He bought cotton allotments from farmers. These farmers had given up their land on eminent domain. The government wanted their land for some reason. But they kept the cotton allotment, and that's an asset. They sold these cotton allotments to Billie Saul Estes. He then took mortgages back, and then they agreed, the farmers and Billie Saul, that they would default, and then they would get some money. He tried to corner the market and a certain fertilizer, and he undersold all the other fertilizer distributors to the farmers. Like they were charging $80. He charged for whatever he charged $20. So then he had to make big loans from various companies in order to pay for this. And there was another side of that too, the cotton allotments, the fertilizer, and then he was storing grain, government-owned grain, in storage elevators, but he didn't have he only had a few storage elevators, and he got cereal, like little plates that give a number for the elevator, and then he'd move them from place to place if the inspectors came around to look at them. And he made huge campaign contributions to Lyndon Johnson and also to Senator Ralph Yarborough. Now, one of the things in Texas, as in Louisiana, you can collect campaign contributions even though you're not running for office.
Get out.
Anytime you can collect campaign contributions. And I learned this when I was working on the Garrison case, because in Louisiana you could do it also. So it's a great source of graft and money and bribes and whatnot.
Now,
so
what was Johnson's relationship with Billie in the beginning?
Johnson's relationship with Billie Celestes. Billie Celestes would hand over cash, huge amounts of cash, to Johnson. He did to do with what he will, and Johnson gave the government endorsement. He gave him the grain. You have to get that grain. You and I can't walk in there and say, "How about giving us some grain to store?" He created. He made all of that possible, and this whole thing comes to a head because there's an honest agriculture official down there in Pecos, Texas, which is where Billie Celestes was, and he didn't want to sign. He had to sign off on each time one of those allotments was sold and the mortgages, and he decided he didn't want to do it. So Billie Celestes, with Johnson behind him, tried to bribe. This man was called Henry Marshall, and he tried to. Billie Celestes tried to bribe him with a job he said, "You can go to Washington, D.C. and work for the agriculture department." And Henry Marshall said no, he liked living in rural Texas. Then Billie Celestes said, "We'll get you a job in Brazil, get you a gig in Brazil." No, he didn't want that either. He said no, and he was coming to New York, to Washington, D.C. on the Monday of the weekend, June 5th, first week of June. And on Saturday, he's killed on his ranch in Bryan, Texas.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Yes, and so this whole thing, and the sheriff in the area, he's already he knows about what to do. So as soon as he comes to the body, he says suicide. It's obviously a suicide, and they rule suicide. But the family of Henry Marshall is very upset because he was not a suicidal or unhappy or anything. And so a year later, they have an inquest. And they lie again, and they say they endorse that it was a suicide, but and then many people die who are involved with Billie Celestes in his scams, and they start to die. One was his accountant, another one, what all these people, one after another, maybe 6 or 7 people, mysteriously die, and they rule carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, when Henry Marshall was shot, he was shot with one of these rifles where you have to turn it around and to get it ready to shoot again. He shoots himself, and then how could he have turned it around and shot it again, and so forth? And then they try carbon monoxide, and his lungs have maybe 30% carbon monoxide, but somehow that doesn't work. And they turn the ignition on in the truck, it doesn't work. The truck is washed shortly thereafter, that's within a day, and so there are no fingerprints taken, no blood samples taken, there's no forensic evidence whatsoever.
Wow. Joan, do you think Johnson is cognizant of what's taking place under it?
Absolutely, because he telephones. When the inquest was held, he telephoned the judge every day. But the Kennedys also telephoned the judge. They were very interested in what was going on with Johnson, particularly Bobby Kennedy, whom, as we know, wanted to get Johnson off the 1964 ticket. As well he might. He never liked him being there in the first place. What a mistake that was. So Bobby Kennedy calls, the president calls, the Johnson people call, Johnson personally calls the judge, and finally the judge just aborts the inquest and they rule. But finally, years later.
So this is taking place in 63, right?
This is taking place in 62.
62, okay.
Henry Marshall was shot in 61. The inquest is in 62. Okay. In 63, 64, Billie Celestes goes to jail for a nice long time. And when he has federal, he has transporting chattel mortgages across the state lines, all kinds of fraud charges. And he goes to jail both on the state and on federal charges. And that's like 7 years. I can't recall the exact amount. He comes out, and then he gets involved in various scams more. And he gets up in court. He testifies the second time that he's arrested. And he said, "I have to confess, I'm a bragger and a liar," to the whole courtroom. He goes to jail for another few years, and when he comes out, and by the time all this happens, he comes out in late 1983, and he decides, I think, there's something in your opening in which you say there's a time for speculation.
Yes.
We can't answer. I don't know who says it, but we can't answer.
With a pitch shifter.
We can't answer every question. But what was in Billie Solesti's mind? Having stewed there in prison, he talked about, in his memoirs, he talks about making friends with mafia people and
I was going to ask you that.
And all of this, and he calls them the Italians. He comes out in late 1983, and he heads straight for the town where Henry Marshall was killed, and he goes to the district attorney. At that time, his name was John Pascal, and he wants to testify. He wants to talk. So they have to make a deal, and they made a deal that he could have immunity only on the Henry Marshall murder, not on all the other murders, as I mentioned, that were people connected with Estes. So Estes goes into the grand jury, and it's all the reporters are there, and the district attorney gives his chief investigator a tape recorder, and they tape Billie Solestes and hand it out to the press, which is really, it's illegal. A grand jury is supposed to be secret. This was not secret. And what the main point of Billie Solestes' testimony was that, let me get this straight, in 1960, right after the Kennedy inauguration and Johnson inauguration, Johnson meets in his backyard with his right-hand man, Cliff Carter, with Mac Wallace, and Billie Solestes, and they plan the murder of Henry Marshall. He has to go. He has to be killed. And he's accusing the president. Johnson is dead by now, I should say. Here's Billie Solestes testifying, but by now Cliff Carter is dead, Mac Wallace is dead, and Johnson is dead. So they're not there to deny it or to say anything or offer any evidence or anything. And that was just Billie Solestes' first salvo. The next thing he did was hire a lawyer named Doug Caddy, who had represented several of the Watergate burglars, and including he knew E. Howard Hunt quite well.
Right. Yeah.
And he went to the Justice Department and said that Billie Solestes is accusing these people, Lyndon Johnson, Mac Wallace, and Carter, of seven. Ultimately, first it was 7 murders, 11 murders. It ultimately went down to up to 17 murders, and it included Johnson's sister. You pronounce it Josefa. Josefa?
Yeah, I thought that's what it was pronounced as, but I've probably...
Josefa. Anyway, her too. Although she died on a Christmas Eve, I think 1961, the very year. And she was at a Christmas Eve party at the LBJ Ranch. The only other guests were Johnson and Lady Bird, John Connolly and his wife, and Josefa and her husband. So Mac Wallace wasn't even there. You can't very well, he was to murder her. And then she goes home and dies in bed. So when Hollis McCombs was doing his investigation for Life magazine, this is so wild. He was incredulous. He said, Josefa died, ? In his notes. What? And then they changed in the press. They changed the cause of death. First it was a heart attack, then it was a brain hemorrhage, and she was put in the ground the same day or the day after. No autopsy, no, and I think someone told me that she wasn't even examined by the doctor who signed the death certificate.
Son of a gun. Okay. I've got to come back to Mr. Johnson because people are going to want to know, did he sign off on the murder? The guy who was the agricultural fellow.
Oh, Henry Marshall. No, you see, because we only have Billie Solestes' word on that.
Okay.
Any other proof. Mac Wallace, you see, then I do a whole my book has the whole life of Mac Wallace in it, where I try to look under every stone, under every rock. What did he actually do for Johnson? If Johnson got him the job with D.H. Byrd, that's speculation. We can't prove it, but it certainly seems likely. Because if you look in the LBJ library, you see a huge file of correspondence between Johnson and D.H. Byrd, including Johnson getting contracts for, Byrd was involved with a lot of aviation, planes that he was building for Temco, and so forth. Now, what did Mac Wallace do for Johnson? And Johnson got him the security clearance, as we discussed. Yeah. So what did Mac Wallace do for Johnson? And I found some evidence because Holland McCombs' notebooks are available. So he's checking out. Billie Solestes has mentioned Wallace once. But I couldn't find the answer to that, really a satisfactory answer. I certainly cannot prove that Mac Wallace murdered all those people that were caught up in the Billie Estes scams. I can't prove that he murdered John F. Kennedy because I don't have and nobody has that fingerprint. So what did he do exactly? Why did Johnson help Wallace?
Was it money or something? Was he laundering money from
One of the things that they tried to do at the Kinzer trial was to keep Josefa's name out of it. And so in the trial, there's no transcript of the trial because the person who did the clerk who did the transcript said, well, there was no appeal, so I threw it all away. So by the time there was an investigation, he had thrown it. They tore down the courthouse, whatever. There's no transcript. There are only notes, newspaper articles, things like that. So there is room for speculation, and it seems I have to say. Let me just throw one other thing in. Less than a day after the Kennedy assassination, Johnson, I think it's the 23rd of November, in the early morning, like 4 a.m., Johnson is lying in bed, and he has around him various acolytes like Jack Valenti, I think, and a bunch of those. And he starts outlining the policies of the Great Society and what he's going to do, and he's going to put Kennedy's policies into practice. Well, my goodness, he's ready. How does he know to get ready all the details so fast? Not even a day after the Kennedy assassination, he was prepared.
Yeah, it's not even a day because Kennedy, he's just gotten off the plane virtually.
It's not even a day. Yeah. Now, it's circumstantial evidence, and I wrote in one book, where did I know, maybe in this Faustian Bargains, I wrote circumstantial evidence is evidence in the court. It's not, you don't always have direct evidence. You don't have a confession or a witness, but that's the evidence. Oh, then they got very upset in the Kirkus. The Kirkus reviews. It's, but that's not really it. But it is true, I think, in the law books that I've read, because I'm very interested in circumstantial evidence. It's evidence. Now we throw in another piece of evidence, and that I'm sure you know is Madeline Brown.
Thank you. I was just going to ask you about her.
Because Madeline Brown was a lover of Lyndon Johnson. She had a child with Lyndon Johnson.
Is there proof to that now at this point?
I have proof, because a lawyer that worked for Johnson named Jerome Ragsdale worked also for the KTBC radio station of Johnson. There's a letter extant that is from Ragsdale to Madeline Brown saying, "Don't worry, we'll take care of you." And Johnson will take care of you. I think it was after Johnson's death. So she was going to be supported. I think it was, but that letter is out there. So then we could say that that's proof that she had the affair with Johnson. Many people saw them. They weren't invisible. Although she later accused Mac Wallace of killing her nanny because the nanny saw her with Johnson. Now, I don't have any evidence for that except her. Now, so Madeline Brown, in the height of her relationship with Johnson, describes a party on the evening before the Kennedy assassination in which there are many luminaries. And Johnson disappears behind closed doors for a while, and he comes out and he says to her, after tomorrow, which would be November 22nd, the day of the assassination, the Kennedys will never bother me again. Something like that's pretty close, paraphrase of that. So they won't humiliate me, whatever, they won't. So this suggests she took that as meaning he had foreknowledge of the Kennedy assassination.
Is there any other reason that could have been said at that point? Is there any other connotation that could be associated? None at all.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
But the thing about Madeline Brown's story, she told this to many, many people, many writers, many videos, and she changes the guest list every time she tells the story. And one time she even put a very unlikely participant called George Rufus Brown. Now, George Rufus Brown was very straight-laced. He's one of the Browns of Brown and Root. He's one of the brothers. The one was called Herman and one was George. George was the one that was particularly close to Johnson. That is true. And one time he said, "I love you and I will do everything you want me to do." And another time somebody else said that he called him every day of his life. They could talk to each other on the phone every day. I mean, he was in tight. He was the senator from Brown and Root. Even Robert Caro describes that. And there's no doubt about that. And
Brown and Root folks later became, they were bought out by Halliburton.
Well, Brown and Root by the way, they were the superb construction company. I have to give them, we have to say this. And when Hurricane Katrina came to New Orleans. There's a bridge. If you've ever been, have you ever been to New Orleans?
No, I haven't. I'd love to.
There's a 24-mile span, two spans, one going one way, one going the other. Of course, Lake Pontchartrain.
Right.
And it's 20. You can't, when you're on the middle of it, I've been there often because I was writing about Garrison. When you're on the middle of it, you can't see land. It looks like you're in the Atlantic Ocean, and the water is right under the car wheels practically. It's like a little narrow strip. And after Hurricane Katrina, everything broke in New Orleans. The bridges over the Mississippi cracked. Everything's cracking. The buildings are cracking. Not a crack in these two spans. It's called the Causeway Bridge, built by Brown and Root.
That's because Hoffa was holding it up. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding, folks. I'm kidding.
Well, they built a similar span in Vietnam when they were later, but and they build it on. They build these things on land and then put them in the water. I don't know how they were superb construction people.
Okay. Now, just to let folks know, and you can verify this, I was always under the impression too that Johnson gave them that contract for Vietnam, and it was quite a lucrative contract. Is there truth in that as well? It was kind of you're my buddies.
I don't know. I don't have. There was a great article in Ramparts magazine, for those old enough to remember Ramparts, called about Brown and Root and Lyndon Johnson and the Vietnam contracts. So that's and they got the lion's share. You know, there are other companies too. There was Bechtel, there was whatever. General Bell Helicopter had a Vietnam, but they had the most by far. And but now the thing that happened. Well, Herman Brown died in December of 1962, and George did not sign off on the contract with Halliburton until after his brother's death. They were, and he stayed with the company, but of course he didn't really have a great power in the company anymore once he signed it over and became part of, Brown and Root became part of Halliburton. And it's Halliburton, under the umbrella of Halliburton, that they have the Vietnam contracts. But Johnson is there, and of course George Brown is still there at that time. So
let's go back to Madeline Brown. Any idea, if we were to take her at face value, that, and I think it's credible that she had a child out of wedlock with Mr. Johnson, how do we take at face value then what she's telling us about that meeting that took place November 21st, the night before, when she keeps she had Nixon there at one point and all kinds of people.
She had Hoover there.
Hoover there, that's true too. Hoover, I forgot about that. Yeah.
He was at his desk the next morning in Washington, D.C. So
I don't know. What do you think, Joan? What's your perspective?
Now we're moving into the realm of speculation. Yeah. I think we have to mention it. You can't leave it out of the discussion. Another thing that Madeline Brown did that is fishy to me is she hooked up with Billie Estes. And they did a lot of dog and pony show. They did a lot of television shows, radio shows, and he is a true liar. So he really was a liar. We can prove that easily. He just said anything that he felt like saying.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now. nightfrightshow.com.
Joan, you worked also with Jim Garrison very intensely. What did Jim think of the Madeline Brown story? Did he give it credence?
No.
Not at all.
Jim Garrison, see, I knew Jim Garrison, but I wasn't writing my book then.
Right, no, of course not.
I started my book in 1997. Garrison died in 1992, around the time of the release of the film, of the Oliver Stone film.
Yeah.
So Garrison hated Johnson. But the reason he hated Johnson was because he didn't release the documents. Because Garrison was a great student of the Warren Report and the Warren Commission exhibits, and he studied that intensely. Remember that he began his investigation by looking at Dean Andrews' testimony to the Warren Commission that a person named Clay Bertrand had called him on the Saturday after the Kennedy assassination, asked him to come down to Dallas to represent Lee Harvey Oswald, whom he had already represented in his case against the Navy, in his discharge against the Navy.
Right. Yeah.
So, and Garrison then I think among maybe the first witness that Garrison saw was Dean Andrews. So Johnson wasn't in the forefront of Garrison's interest, although he didn't like him. He didn't think he was honest. And of course, the thing that bothered a lot of people, maybe today the younger people don't feel that way, the travesty of Vietnam, the horror of the bombing and Johnson is right in the middle of that. And there has to be said for President Kennedy that if you look in Gordon Goldstein's book, Lessons of Disaster, I think it's called. It's the autobiography of George Bundy, written by a student after his death. Lessons in Disaster. Anyway, he describes how every day Kennedy's cabinet, that included Rusk and McNamara and George Bundy himself, were asking him to send ground troops to Vietnam. And they were asking, just send 2, just send 100, just send. The key was that he should send ground troops. And he resisted every single one of them.
Is there a parallel there to be learned that maybe Mr. Obama learned as well? Because everybody's bugging him right now to send troops over to Syria.
Obama, you're Canadian, so you're free from any of this. Obama used murder. One of the people at the Billie Celeste's grand jury that I talked about, where he testifies, somebody said this is the first time a president, that meaning Johnson, has been accused of murder, meaning the Henry Marshall and all of that.
Yeah.
Now, in the Obama case, he has targeted various individuals that he thought were Al-Qaeda's or whatever he thought they were. They hadn't committed any crime at the time, American citizens, and he sent drones and killed them, and also their children. One of them, in that case of Anwar al-Awlaki, they killed his son with a drone. Now, surely his son hadn't done anything, and his cousin, and that's a murder. That's murder. This man has committed murder, and not only that, he has been the worst president we've ever had for transparency and for civil liberties. And this seems not important today, there were various photographs of Abu Ghraib that had not been released. And the Second Circuit, the Court of Appeals, ruled that they can be, the ACLU brought the case, that they should be released. And he said, I'll do it over my dead body, over your dead body. Well, he leaned on the court, that court, to the extent that they never released the photo. Why is the president involved with releasing photographs? What's
going on there?
This man, it doesn't seem like he's all there. I don't think he is making his own decisions. I know
what you're saying.
But one of the things, when you start working with Garrison and the Garrison case, Garrison looked at Oswald and said he doesn't know anyone who wasn't with CIA. That was Garrison's first reaction. And then he started to show Ferry, Shaw. And, years later, after Garrison's death, I was able to put in the update to A Farewell to Justice, a document that was released by the CIA's History Review Group. And that group, they were looking at various documents from the HSCA, and they said that Clay Shaw, was a highly paid contract source of CIA. Keywords are highly paid. He wasn't just somebody debriefed when he took a trip or anything like that. He was a source of theirs, an asset of theirs. So Garrison was right. I have to, and even today, as time goes by, you rarely hear Garrison's name. You don't hear it in conferences so much, unless I'm there, or maybe Oliver Stone, of course. But even you don't hear it. People distance themselves. People who are dealing with the New Orleans material.
Why is that? Why are they distancing themselves?
Because they're so despised by CIA, who have gotten all their media forces marshaled against Garrison, that it will splash off on the writers, and that they will be denied reviews in the New York Times, Washington Post. They'll be attacked. They'll be isolated. No one wants to talk to them because Garrison's name is mud, anathema. So, but I don't care I don't know why, it just so happens I don't. And then maybe because I knew him and I feel sorry for him and everything that he went through. And I I know, really, it doesn't matter to me. I don't need a review. I know, or whatever.
Farewell to Justice is the book you wrote on Jim Garrison,
That's
which is
it.
groundbreaking. Absolutely groundbreaking. By the way,
Thank you.
folks, Joan Mellen tonight, www.nightfrightshow. Just click on all her book covers, and there shall be plenty there for you to click on. That'll take you right to a spot where you can order them from the comfort of your own home. Amazing researcher, groundbreaking researcher. And when it comes to material,
is Faustian Bargains.
Faustian Bargains. That's the new book.
It has Johnson, sinister, and then cut into his face is a photograph of Mac Wallace and all the fingerprints all around him. So what are these fingerprints doing? Then you read the book and you find out about the fingerprints.
Okay, I've got to ask you this big question too, because I'm looking at the time. Johnson have JFK killed?
I'm trying, you see, I happen to believe that you must be able to prove. When I say those are not his fingerprints, Mac Wallace's fingerprints, I have digital, analytic, scientific, I can prove it. When we have Johnson and JFK, there's an alternate explanation, and that is that those who killed JFK kept Johnson out of the loop, except maybe with some foreknowledge, but kept him somewhat out of the loop so that he could have plausible deniability. He's the guy that's profiting from it. He becomes president of the United States, which is what he wanted all his life. And yet he's free of the taint. He did but he knew what he had to do. There's no doubt about that, because we have that famous quote on Christmas Eve after the Kennedy assassination, when Johnson turns to one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and says, "Just get me elected," meaning the 1964 election, "and I'll give you your war."
Give you your goddamn war. Yeah.
So he knew what he had to do.
What always puzzled me, was he authentic in bringing all those policies that were started under JFK? Right away, civil rights.
This is an important question. So now, the people who want to cover for Johnson, the biographers that want to say, well, it's balanced, it's this, civil rights, and it's also the other, the sinister Johnson. But I don't think so. And I try to do as much research into the Civil Rights Act as I could. I found quotes from Johnson in which he uses what they call the N word.
Yes, I've
I
heard
don't know if
those
you saw the movie, The Great State of Jones.
Yeah.
This movie about the Civil War.
I just saw it last night. Fantastic. I loved it.
It's fantastic. And you notice that they use the language that we're not allowed to use. Yeah. You are, maybe you're in Canada. But they use it in the right way. They say, who is a nigger? It's not anyone who's black or who was a slave. It's these people, the white ruling class of the South and the planter class and the aristocracy. We recommend, both of us agree, and we recommend that The Great State of Jones. It's fabulous.
It really is a great movie.
I'm a film critic. I've written 7 books about movies, so I have some credibility in film analysis, and it's really worth seeing. I was dragged there, but it's really worth seeing.
Well, you've got to come back on. We'll talk film one night. How's that?
Yes, absolutely. I have to prepare. But you asked me if Johnson had Kennedy killed. We certainly can't. Now, look, we have the Madeleine Brown. Yeah. We have that early morning statement where he seems to have been prepared and know well in advance what he was going to do as president. But I can't. You see, I have a lot of evidence of footprints of CIA in the New Orleans part of the story and the Oswald story. I cannot trace Johnson somehow to Clay Shaw and David Ferry.
Okay.
And I have Ferry and Shaw with Oswald. There's no doubt about that. I can prove that, which was Garrison had a hell of a time trying to prove that. But we can prove that. We have evidence. We have other evidence of CIA in Thomas Edward Beckham and his relation with CIA, Fred Lee Chrisman. We have a lot of Garrison evidence. And the people who would push the Johnson story sometimes say, this is a Texas story. This is a Texas murder. It's an example of Texas justice. Well, it can't be only a Texas story. We've got to be able to connect all of those.
Yeah, you see, I was always curious, too, why Johnson would put himself in the line of fire. Because when you've got a bunch of assassins, the way they assembled in DEaley Plaza, you never know where those bullets are going to go. And I was always curious why he would put himself in the line of fire. And then the other thing I was curious about that I just asked you is why would he champion all those great policies that were started under JFK? And we had talked about this off air as well. I had mentioned I had met up with Ted Sorensen and how Ted told me that Johnson gave him, as he called it, the Johnson treatment. And, JFK's up there right now looking down right at us. We need you so much to continue his legacy. That's the Johnson treatment.
I knew Sorensen. I knew Sorensen a little bit.
Did you really? Yeah.
Dinner party. There's Sorensen across the table. So I'm still talking about John F. Kennedy, and I'm saying, I was really disappointed because he had promised to desegregate federally sponsored housing when he became president, and he didn't. And I say this, and Ted Sorensen follows me into the living room after dinner, and he says he was going to.
Sorensen told me he was a little upset with Kennedy that he felt he was too slow on civil rights.
Okay, good, fair enough. Fair enough. Now, I asked both Sorensen and Arthur Schlesinger, who do they think killed President Kennedy?
What was their response?
Now, Sorensen wouldn't answer at all. And I also asked Sorensen the source of the quote that was given in the New York Times where Kennedy says, "I'll tear the CIA in 1,000 pieces and throw it to the wind." It's there without a source. And so I asked Sorensen, who said that? Did Kennedy say that? Did anyone hear him say that? I never heard of it. Now, lying, could be lying. Now I asked Schlesinger, or actually I had an intermediary. I'm like Johnson. I had an intermediary because he was mad at me for another book that I wrote. And so Schlesinger said, we were at war with the national security people.
Holy cow.
He didn't say Texas, Johnson, and that whole thing. So, and the likelihood that Johnson would expose himself, it's given, if you look at his whole history, if you read Faustian Bargains, you see all the devilish things he did. One of the things he did, by the way, that I found in 1967, he was going to run for office again, remember, in 68. Then he put his brother, Sam Houston Johnson, into a hospital. He wasn't sick. He was just to keep him out of the way so he wouldn't talk to the press or talk to anyone. And the source for that is a good one. It's a doctor at the hospital named Dr. Samuel Axelrad, who saw him there. He said he used to come down from his room to meals, didn't talk to anyone, and went back upstairs. And he lived there for about a year. Now, it was a military hospital. Dr. Axelrad was doing his military service at the time. And he was a urologist, I think. And he just told me this. And then someone else I know saw Samuel Houston Johnson on a plane. He sat next to him on a plane. And he said that the brother said that Lyndon Johnson was the meanest man he ever saw.
Holy cow.
So the brother was too talkative. Johnson was right to stash him away because he was a talker, as was Josefa.
Joan, we have a caller. He's your friend and mine, Alan Dale. Alan?
Hi, Dale.
I'm here.
Would you like to ask some questions to Joan?
Here's what I want to do. I don't want to detract, and I certainly don't want to impose. I don't want to take up time where we could be listening to Professor Mellen. I want to refer very briefly to a couple of things. The first is that Faustian Bargains, Lyndon Johnson, and Mac Wallace in the Robber Baron Culture of Texas has a scheduled publication date of September 13th, but it is available right now for pre-order. And I want to propose that everyone with any level of interest in these related complexities associated with the study of President Kennedy's assassination should do exactly that. And while they're at Amazon, they should be aware that in 2005, Professor Mellen produced arguably the definitive book on Jim Garrison, A Farewell to Justice. It was updated for a 2013 edition. In 2012, she produced a book called Our Man in Haiti, George de Mohrenschildt and the CIA in the Nightmare Republic. I cannot recommend that book highly enough. And in February of this year, 2016, her book, The Great Game in Cuba, CIA and the Cuban Revolution, was updated for a 2016 edition. I'm cautious about epistemology. I'm careful about what I address and what I compliment and what I endorse. I consider these to be absolutely essential materials, and I'm hopeful that others will feel the same.
Fair enough.
I didn't ask him to do that. I just want to say, Alan Dale is the sweetest thing, but that wasn't prompted by me.
The only other thing I want to address very
briefly. Was that the check you got from her today, Alan?
No. I can't be bought.
Only it's a thank you.
I can't be bought, I assure you, but you're welcome. The other thing that is of slight concern to me, Professor, and I don't want you to be alarmed, but I've noticed that there seems to be someone behind you, so I've taken the liberty of notifying the authorities. They should be there very soon, so don't be concerned. Okay.
That's my house guest, Ralph Stoneman.
There you go. I'm glad to know. Anyway, it's an honor to get to hear you speak. I'm very grateful to you for your invaluable unsung heroic work in the related areas pertaining to our mutual interest. And God bless you. I mean it sincerely.
Thank you, Alan. No one is sweeter than you.
Take care.
In the whole field.
Thanks, Alan. That was beautiful. Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but what were the epiphanies that you came across? Because there's 1,001 other books of consisting of Johnson and the assassination. And
we didn't mention this. There was a ship called the USS Liberty, a spy ship that was a United States ship that was placed in the East Mediterranean at the time of the Six-Day War, June 1967. Yeah. And the ship was hit. I would say it was attacked by unmarked planes. And all the antenna was a spy ship, so there were 45 antenna on deck and a big dish. And everyone was knocked out, but somehow one of the sailors managed to get one transmitter going, and they send a distress call to the 6th Fleet, which was about 500 miles away, 400 to 500, and it goes through, and the admirals there, what are they, most of the admirals, I won't say all, immediately decide to launch planes to go and to help the Liberty. They're calling for help. We're being attacked. We're under attack. They were not. U.S. was not in the Six-Day War. Now so suddenly they get a telephone call from Robert McNamara, Johnson's Secretary of Defense, and he says, "Call back those planes." The admirals can't understand why. They think maybe they think nuclear warheads are in there, so they call back they send planes that cannot be configured for nuclear weapons. And McNamara calls back. I said, call back those planes. And then the admirals, Admiral Lawrence Guise, he says, I'm not going to listen to this. He's just a hired hand, right, or McNamara. And Johnson grabs the telephone and says, call back. I don't care if everyone on that ship drowns or the ship sinks. And this is a direct quote, I will not embarrass an ally. How does he know that it was Israel that attacked the ship? And my theory is, as I'm writing a book about it, is that it was a collaboration. The attack on the USS Liberty was a collaboration between the United States and Israel, between the Mossad and CIA. And the motive was something that they had for a decade before, to topple Nasser in Egypt. And that's now look at Johnson's role there, because it's against the military code to leave people in harm's way, to leave people out there to be killed. It's a war crime, as defined in Nuremberg. And so the sailors put a petition for war crimes to the Department of the Army, which is where you do it, and they just said that we have no interest in this. And no investigation has ever been held but one, which was a false investigation forged at the time of the attack, and nothing in the 50 years that have ensued. So there's Johnson right in the middle of this. And then he lied about it. He lied about how many people were killed. He lied about what he knew. He lied and lied and lied and lied. And you can really see, here's Johnson caught out. They had hoped that the ship would sink. Egypt would be blamed, and then they could go there and bomb Cairo. And we had planes on the way to Cairo sent by the 6th Fleet. That's why I say one of the admirals knew. He had foreknowledge of the whole business. And then they had to be called back. Because once that SOS went out, once Israel was exposed as having attacked Liberty, it's obvious it was a pretext to blame Egypt. They decided not to go through with it. There's Johnson. And this is not known, because I didn't know. A person, during the course of my investigation of Johnson, somebody said to me, what about the USS Liberty? I never heard of it. Well, many people have not heard of it somehow. And then I investigated, and I really got into it so much, I realized it's going to be a book. But I put it as a long chapter in this book because I don't think you could discuss Johnson's presidency without discussing the USS Liberty.
Yeah, there was a great deal of Soviet influence, folks, on Nasser and Egypt. And the United States, I think, was a little bit nervous, because, let's face it, that's why we went into Vietnam, because of fear of spread of communism. There was the whole Cuba thing a few years before that, afraid of the spread of communism. And, some people think the Six-Day War was initially started by the Soviet Union giving false intelligence information to Nasser. So Nasser would react against that. And then, of course, it would escalate, and then the Israelis would react against that, and up and up and up and up. And then you've got the two superpowers, once again, with everybody's lives at stake, jockeying for
Soviets
power.
Right out there. They had 20 ships in the East Mediterranean, nuclear submarine. They had the orders. The orders to the Soviet submarine was only if we bomb Cairo, they're going to bomb Israel, but only as a reaction to bombing Cairo. So if we had bombed Cairo, then the Soviets would have bombed. They didn't have the range, so they were going to go to something called the Temple of the Rockets, where Muhammad went up to heaven.
I've heard of that place.
Golden Temple or Golden Dome, and that's where. And because those planes did not bomb Cairo, even though they were on their way, very short. They were almost there. The Soviets did not retaliate. So I don't know who's the aggressor here.
Yeah.
The Joint Chiefs of Staff, when they heard about the attack on Liberty, they were going to bomb Haifa, and that was the place where the torpedo boats took off that bombed the Liberty, which one torpedo hit at 40-foot hole, and it's a miracle that it didn't sink.
Really
you have to contribute to the expertise of the U.S. Navy that he had kept that ship. It was kept, sort of listing 9 degrees, and it was all the water was rushing in, and they managed to
stay afloat
and go to Malta and then come back to the United States. But
Thank God.
So many died anyway. Many died.
They did.
4 died, and I think more than 174 injured, and many have illnesses all their lives. They've lived now that many years have passed. And
Joan, we've got to wrap up, I'm afraid. Thank you so much for coming on the show, folks. Joan Mellen, of course. All her books will be there, www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on the book covers. Order them from the comfort of your own home. Joan, thank you so much. When your next book's out, don't be shy. Come on.
Thank you.
You got a home here, my friend.
Thank you, Brent. Appreciate it.
Okay, and to echo Alan's sentiments, God bless. Zeigesen.
Same to you. I'm Jewish too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you all later.
You're listening to Night Fright and your host, Brent Holland. The time is now. Your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now, nightfrightshow.com.